The last of the monotheisms we'll talk about is Islam. Islam is created by Muhammad, pictured here with his wife Khadijah. It's very difficult to find pictures of Muhammad because under Islamic law, people or animals can't be depicted in religious art. Over here we have the eventual extents of the Muslim Empire. The Muslims were, from their inception, a conquering people, and they spread their religion as they spread their power, starting here in Arabia and eventually moving all the way into France in the west, into India in the east, and, though not depicted on this map, eventually into Eastern Europe and being stopped at Vienna. Muhammad, pictured here, was from Mecca, where he was a caravan leader and earned a great reputation as a caravan leader. A highly dangerous job, as the Arabian Peninsula was rather lawless, and transporting valuable goods made you always susceptible to being raided. Mecca was also a religious center, as it had one of the most popular polytheistic shrines in the area, called the Kaaba. The Kaaba eventually became the central shrine or central pilgrimage point for all Muslims, although now it has no polytheistic idols in it, as Muhammad got rid of them all after his religious conversion. Traveling to the Kaaba at least once in your life is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. So Muhammad has a religious conversion. He believes that an angel of the Lord, the same God that talked to Abraham and Moses and the same God that sent Jesus down, was now talking to him and asking to spread a similar religion about worshiping the one true God all through Arabia and beyond. Muhammad looks for followers first in Mecca and gets a couple of his family members to believe in his new religion, but he's not very popular elsewhere in Mecca, and he's eventually driven out. He flees with a few followers and family to Medina, and this fleeing is called the Hijra and is very important to Muslims. Muhammad becomes the leader of Medina, both the religious and the political leader, and this begins one of the most important political traditions in Islam, and that is the government is also the leader, is also a religious leader, essentially, in the country. So whereas oftentimes in Western countries there's a separation of church and state, in the Middle East and Islamic countries, the church and the state are seen as one. After converting the people of Medina to his new religion, Islam, Muhammad then leads the people of Medina on a campaign of conquest back to Mecca, which Muhammad successfully conquers. From there, Muhammad leads the Islamic conquest to eventually take over most of the Arabian Peninsula, and his successors keep going and eventually, as we said before, conquer the land from Spain all the way over to India. The holy book of Islam is the Quran. Originally written in Arabic, it wasn't written down until after Muhammad's death, when his followers who had memorized his teachings recorded them for all Muslims to read in the future. Central to the Islamic faith are the 5 pillars of Islam, 5 rules all Muslims must follow. The first, Shahada, is the testimony and declaration of faith. And essentially, a Muslim must say, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. While the Muslims believed Jesus was an important prophet of God, they didn't believe that he was a son of God, didn't believe that God had any offspring. But they believed that Muhammad was the most important and final prophet of this monotheistic God of the Jews and Christians. Number 2, all Muslims must pray 5 times a day, at sunup and sundown, and 3 times in between. If you travel to an Islamic country, they have call to prayer broadcast over loudspeakers all through the streets, so you know when to pray. And you also must face Mecca when you pray if you're a Muslim. Charity is very important to Muslims. They must give 2.5% of their income to the poor. Muslims must fast, not eat between sunup and sundown during the month of Ramadan. There's normally much feasting after sundown. And on that same note, Muslims can't drink, according to the Quran. The last pillar of Islam is one we spoke about before. the Hajj. Once in a Muslim's life, they should travel to Mecca, visit the Kaaba. If they can afford it, they should travel once a year. The final central part of Islam that we'll study for this class, and often called the sixth pillar of Islam, is the Jihad, or holy war. There's two types of jihad in Islam. One, and more important arguably, is the internal jihad that each Muslim must fight against evil. The other kind of jihad is the religious military conquest, which the Muslims carried out extremely effectively in the years after Muhammad's death. Here we see the extent of the Islamic conquest after Muhammad's death. This green stuff, it says here, was conquered by 750 AD. And we talked about before, eventually they gained this area too. The next most significant event in the history of Islam is a split between the Sunnis and the Shiites, or Shias. After Muhammad's death, there were 4 caliphs who led a united Muslim empire. And a caliph is what we were talking about before. It's both a political and a religious leader, like a theocracy. So there were 4 caliphs that Muslim existed as a united religion under. The last of these caliphs is named Ali. And this is the last caliph that both Sunnis and Shiites recognize, last leader. After Ali's death, the Muslim empire is taken over by the Umayyads after a dispute with another member of Ali's family. And a little while into this Umayyad dynasty, the first Umayyad dies. And at this point, a succession dispute erupts. And on one side is Hussein, Ali's son. And on the other side is another Umayyad. And essentially what happens is Hussein and his family are killed by the Umayyads in Karbala, Iraq in 680 AD. And this marks the split between the Sunnis and the Shiites. The Shiites, followers of Hussein, and the Sunnis are not. And essentially, the Shiites' most concentrated population is in Iraq and Iran, and their holiest cities are Najaf, where Ali is buried, and Karbala, where Hussein was killed. And we can see both of these cities experiencing lots of strife between Sunnis and Shiites in Iraq today. So in summary, remember the story of Muhammad and Khadijah. Remember the 5 pillars of Islam and Jihad. Remember the split between the Shias and the Sunnis, as this still affects lots of politics today. And remember the caliph system, where in Islamic countries, oftentimes political leaders and religious leaders are the same people, and those two systems are united.